And let's start. So, Andrew Doyle, nice to see you again.
Hello.
When we spoke last time, it's like a couple of years ago. Uh, you were in Britain at the peak of the woke religion wave, or
Yeah.
shall we call it like that? Now you wrote a book which is called End of Woke. Uh, so I have to ask you, is it End of the Vogue?
Well, it could be. I mean, the title of the book is not meant to be some kind of definitive statement. It's I'm talking about what the end of woke might look like and whether we're there at that point. I think the argument that I present is that we're certainly at a point at the beginning of the decline, and I think all of that is quite clear. And I explore in the book whether wokeness will reemerge in some form or another, or whether it will be superseded by a different kind of authoritarianism, maybe one that emerges from a different political tribe. All of these things are possible. And that's what I'm exploring in the book, really. But there's too many things that have happened that I think have pretty much suggested that we're not going to go back to where we were. I mean, you mentioned speaking to me at the peak of wokeness. Well, all of the studies tell us that support for this movement peaked at around 2021, and it has been steadily declining ever since. And I just don't think you can put things back in the box now. You know, we've had the Supreme Court ruling in England, which has said that you can't change sex by law just if you have a gender recognition certificate. We've had the caste review, which has completely changed the landscape with the banning of puberty blockers in the UK. We've just this week had the US Supreme Court ruling that Tennessee is well within its rights to ban gender affirming care, what they euphemistically call gender affirming care. And of course, this has caused a lot of outrage amongst activist captured organizations such as the American Psychiatric Association, which has put out a very angry statement about it. But of course, that organization, although they claim to be protecting the science and although they claim to be on the right side of history, won't be able to define gender identity, and nor will they be able to prove that any child has one. And yet they are the ones who are advocating this medicalization of kids just for being a bit different. Maybe boys who are a bit effeminate, girls who are a bit masculine or tomboyish. And they are advocating, rather than a psychotherapeutic approach to those sorts of problems, actual medicalization, sterilization, and even in some cases castration. Oh, there have been hundreds of double mastectomies of girls under the age of 18. I think in America there's been about 50 under the age of 12 and a half. So this is butchery of healthy children who require psychotherapeutic help. They do not require some sort of high priest to come in with his or her scalpel and to make this offering to their gods. And that's effectively what's been happening. But things are changing now far too rapidly. Trump in the White House signing various executive orders, reminding people that there are two sexes and society needs to be organized around that biological reality rather than this esoteric notion of a gender identity, which no one can define, not even the people who claim to have one. So I think things have moved on very, very rapidly. So when I write a book called The End of Woke, sounds very optimistic, but I think all the signs are there that it is coming to an end in whatever form it currently exists. And it might reemerge. You know, the woke are very adept at redefining their terms, coming back in a new disguise. I don't know, but I'm exploring the possibilities.
All right. You went, let's say, pretty deep into the wokeness thing. You were one of the first people openly, or first public figures openly be against woke in Britain. You probably Douglas Murray, Constantine Kissin, other people, but you know this movement very well. Can you say some basic timeline when this movement really emerged, when it get to the power? Because the thing is that when you speak with the woke people, there is a they always put themselves in a place of minority. We are not the ones who rule, capitalists rule or conservatives rule or whatever rule. So they always they never say like, yes, we are on in the power, basically.
Yeah.
So when do you think the left wokeness basically got to the power?
Well, they're not being honest. They're not being honest about that. Wokeness is a deeply capitalistic enterprise. The DEI industry is an $8 billion a year industry. You know, there are people making absolute fortune out of this. So the idea, not to mention pharmaceutical companies and gender abattoirs. So I think the idea that this is not in any way capitalist is an absolute nonsense. So they don't recognize themselves for what they are. But if you want to really know about where this came from, well, one of the key arguments I make in the book is that authoritarianism, that instinct, is the default in humankind and will reemerge in one way or another, irrespective of what timeline you're on. And so in that sense, wokeness is as old as humanity itself, insofar as that impulse to simply silence and coerce and bully others into submission is one that would have existed in the earliest days of human evolution. So it's always been there. This is just the latest manifestation of it. But if you want to know where the philosophical origins are, you'd have to go back to the 1960s, really, where you have the New Left, the Frankfurt School, with their mistrust of popular culture, their mistrust of the masses. You could tie that in with the French postmodernists of the same era. These are anti-liberal movements, very explicitly anti-liberal, and I mean that in liberal in the traditional sense of the word. French postmodernists advancing the idea that our understanding of reality is entirely constructed through language. And from that, you get this idea that censorship is the only way forward. They drew on Foucault, for instance, one of the French postmodernists, in their understanding of society operating according to invisible power structures, which only they are blessed enough to identify, like an exorcist or something, or a priest who is able to detect evil spirits. So those are the sort of philosophical origins. And of course, around this time, you have the long march through the institutions that attempt to ideologically capture various bodies, be that the academia or the church or government. So it's all a very long process. Of course, a lot of this happens really by accident and by fashion and by trends. And really, what's interesting about the woke is they are in many ways disconnected from that kind of thing. You know, a lot of the woke philosophy can be really outlined. If you read an essay by Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School called Repressive Tolerance, it's pretty much a blueprint for how the woke behave, but very few of them have ever read it or even know of its existence. So it isn't like they've taken an existing philosophical template and run with it. These ideas, this authoritarian notion has just sort of developed the idea that we need to censor our opponents, force other people to think the way that we think. Like I say, it's something that's innate. And I would say that really what happened is that around 2012, the woke movement really started picking up, and you started getting those phrases like toxic masculinity or white privilege, those kind of phrases creeping into the idea. That phrase, trans women are women, I don't think anyone had heard that phrase before 2015, and all of a sudden it becomes one of the most repeated slogans in the mainstream media, even though, of course, trans women by definition cannot be women, otherwise you wouldn't call them trans. They are biological men who identify as women. And so, you know, it kicks off around 2012. And then by the time you get to 2020, it feels like people are sick of it. It feels like people are sick of being bullied, silenced. People are annoyed at the fact that they've had to attend training sessions at work about how racist they are or how evil they are, the original sin, you know. And people start writing articles saying, well, wokeness is probably dying now. It's probably over. But then you get the summer of 2020, you get George Floyd, and it all explodes, and it becomes much more intense than we've ever seen it before. But I think partly because of that, and because of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is now completely discredited, of course, because so many of their key figures took a lot of that charity donations and spent it on luxury apartments. I think only a third of the many millions of dollars that were donated actually ended up going to any black communities, unless you count the figureheads of BLM who are buying, you know, beach houses in Malibu or whatever it might be. I don't know if that counts as charity. So it really, it's galvanized around 2020. This religion now has a martyr in the form of George Floyd. I mean, quite explicitly, like there are paintings, murals of him with angels' wings and halos, and even the 5-year commemoration, I think it was last month, the website that was advertising the events had him with a halo. Now, this is a man who had a criminal record, who had been involved with an armed robbery on a pregnant woman's house, held a gun to this woman, or maybe she wasn't pregnant, but she had a kid in the house. You know, this is not someone who you want as your figurehead, as your martyr. Now, I'm not saying, I think it's tragic when anyone dies, and I think everyone should be open to the possibility of repentance. And maybe he'd moved on from that past, and he's a human being like everyone else and didn't deserve what happened to him. But the point is that he had become this kind of martyr figure for this religion. That's what they needed. They needed that kind of figure. They'd already got the child saint of Greta Thunberg, who, of course, if you look back at medieval Christendom, there were lots of child saints. It was one of the sort of very common ideas of the time. So that's just another version of that. And one of the things I'm keen to do in the book is to show how all of these things have historical precedence. And particularly with the woke movement, what was interesting is them painting themselves as the victim, as the underdog. Well, there have been elements of authoritarian movements in the past that have done that too. Said we've been hard done by. But then most of them admitted their power, didn't they? If you go to the extreme of Nazi Germany, which of course started out with an idea of a grievance culture. We were hard done by in the Treaty of Versailles. We have been downtrodden as Germans in Europe. But they, of course, turned that into a triumphalist displays of power and might and, pure evil as far as I'm concerned. And but that's not the woke approach. The woke approach is to hold on to that victimhood idea and to use it as a cudgel, use it as a weapon, and to run with it, and to never admit that you're in power, even when you quite clearly are. The woke, of course, have the support, or at least at their height, had the support of all major billion-dollar corporations, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, the academia, the law, the police. I mean, you could have activists phoning up the police and getting people arrested for using the wrong language. That's incredible power. These are very powerful people, but they would never admit it because their power had been secured through this pretense of victimhood. So that's changed now. Major corporations like Facebook, like Meta, like Walmart and McDonald's and Google, they're all rolling back this DEI stuff. They're all stripping it away. So their power base is falling down.
Maybe I should rephrase the question. When do you think woke became mainstream?
Around 2012, 2013.
All right.
That's when it really kicked in. And then it seized complete dominance in 2020. And then it started to wither in about 2022. And it's still withering now. I mean, I know there's lots of stuff still happening that makes you think it's not gone anywhere. And it hasn't gone anywhere. And it still has incredible clout. But it doesn't have quite the power that it used to have. And also, it now looks like it can be defeated. Whereas 3 years ago, it looked like it was here to stay. And we would all have to submit, and we'd all end up living like that movie Demolition Man, where we would go around watching everything we said, in case we got fined for saying the wrong thing. But now that dystopia may not happen. It looks like that we might get a different kind of dystopia, certainly. No civilization lasts forever. But it doesn't look like wokeness will be the thing that crumbles Western civilization. It might be something else.
You obviously thinking about this issue in a very complex way, historically, philosophically, etc. Do you think that this kind of, wokeness mindset, if I would say correctly, is it something which is like in us? It's part of human nature, or is it something which needs to have specific social situation to explode, or is it?
I mean, if you go back to one of the early liberal thinkers, which is Thomas Hobbes, who wrote Leviathan, and this is the idea that we sacrifice some of our liberties in order for the good of the society and for the good of the state. We're all part of the body politic because there is an innate brutishness to humankind. Now, later liberal thinkers went away from that. People like Rousseau, people like Locke, who sort of believed in an innate goodness within humankind, an innate sense of cooperation and charity. Now, I don't share that view. I go back to Hobbes. I believe that we do have this innate predisposition to authoritarianism. And the thing that protects us against it, well, there's two things that protect us. Firstly is civilization, which is cultivated over many, many centuries, which is why tradition is important, which is why this oughtn't to be torn down. We have civilization is a kind of armor, a kind of shield against our baser animal instincts, in the way that marriage is a kind of containment device for the impulse of sexuality, human sexuality, which is very powerful and very animal. And so we have cultivated this institution, I suppose, to tame it and to And that's what our education is all about. It's about taming, little kids are basically beasts. They behave like animals. When they don't get what they want, they don't like something they're eating, they spit it out. If they don't like another kid, they hit them. That's why we need to be socialized out of that. And unfortunately, under our current system, a lot of adults haven't been effectively socialized. And that's when you get wokeness, because wokeness is infantilism writ large, tantrums, toddler behavior. That's what it is. So I would say, yes, it is absolutely innate. So it's civilization on the one hand. The other thing is the social contract, something that we cultivate over a long, long time in any given society through various difficult and slippery negotiations, compromises, and we eventually get to a point, the way that we eventually reach the point in our society that we agree, 99% of us agree that open declarations of racism are not acceptable, right? We reach that point through this negotiating of the social contract. That's not to say, I'm a free speech absolutist. I think if you want to say racist things, you shouldn't be arrested for it. That's your prerogative. But my point is, by doing that, you are deviating from the agreed social contract, and you will face certain consequences for that. You won't have many friends. People aren't going to invite you to dinner. You're probably not going to get promoted, that kind of thing. It isn't coercion or authoritarian force. It's this agreed contract that we have developed over a long time. That's what protects us from that authoritarian impulse, or that's the idea that I'm positing in the book. And what the woke movement does is tears all of that apart, destroys the social contract. If you look at Sweden now, and there are other reasons for this, including mass migration on an unprecedented scale from cultures that haven't developed a social contract where they believe in liberal values and free speech. What happens? It's no longer a high trust society. Sweden was once one of the highest, a high trust society with the lowest crime rate in Europe, and now it's flipped. It's a very low trust society. It is currently, with the exception of Mexico, the country that has more gun and bomb attacks than any country not at war in the world. That's an astonishing turnaround. And that has happened because the social contract has been demolished, because they decided that mass migration from cultures where liberal values are not considered important was somehow containable, was somehow sustainable. And of course, they're learning now that it absolutely wasn't. And this is why the social contract is so important, and why education and socialization is so important. And civilization, ultimately, I'm making a case for civilization in this book, and not in a culturally relativist way. I think some civilizations are superior to others. They are more ethical than others. They are better than others. And I think that a civilization that prioritizes freedom is going to be the best way to live. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's a bit of a rant.
Yeah. I love rants.
Okay,
really love
fine. Well, you've come to the right place.
Now, tell me, wokeness is now have now a lot of parts. It started as a feminist, anti-racist movement. Now the migration gets in now, and now transgender, obviously, which is like latest the thing of the wokeness. Is there any other thing which wokeness didn't weaponized?
Well, in short, what you're driving at there is this notion of group identity, which is the absolute epitome of what wokeness stands for. It is a monomania about the notion of group identity, unlike traditional Marxism, which is a monomania about class and money and the economy. This is about, it takes all of that and rips it away and says, let's talk about group identity instead. That the notion of the dichotomy of oppressor and oppressed is actually relating to group identity and nothing else. Nothing else. That's what they believe. So that, hence, of course, you would have racism tied up with homophobia, transphobia, all the phobias. You get this idea of intersectionality, but it's all predicated on group identity. That's what it's all about. And that's why when this group comes along and says, we believe in a thing called gender identity as a soul that we mysteriously have, which means that we might be born in the wrong body. Of course, the woke will champion it. And because it's the most minority, the very few people who make that claim, it becomes elevated within the victim hierarchy, right up at the top. I mean, even old-fashioned transsexuals, people I've known many, many years, they never believed that they had actually changed sex. They all knew that wasn't possible. This is quite a relatively new idea that someone can actually change sex, which they can't. I mean, we have to be truthful about this stuff. No human being has ever changed sex, ever. It's not something that we can do. There are some species that can. I know that clownfish are often invoked, but we are not fish. And so therefore we have to make do with the fact that we don't have this gendered soul. Such a thing does not exist. Very few people believe in it. A lot of trans people don't believe in it. And so the idea that we should reorganize society around this religious belief that a tiny minority hold makes absolutely no sense at all. But it makes sense if you start seeing it as a victim group, and that they need to be defended at all costs. And unfortunately, that's how we got here, I think.
What I like about your thesis about the wokeness is that you made a very good point to compare it with the religion, especially in your last book, New Puritans, which is I really believe it's very strong and very clever point. Now, do you believe that if we will talk about wokeness as a religion, do you think there are nations who are more vulnerable to this religion than others? I mean, are there nations who are more likely to accept this religion than others? Why I'm making this point is that obviously when now you see the situation in the United States and Great Britain, it's been probably the same level of wokeness, if I say it very vulgar. And now after Trump, we see like end of wokeness, as you said, in United States, but UK still goes on the same trajectory.
Yeah, but that's because this religion is practiced by the people in power, and that's all it ever was. I mean, this has always been a top-down imposed ideology. As I quote in the book, only 8% of the population of the US and the UK ever supported this, even at the height of the woke movement. So this has always been a minority view. It just so happens that the people in power supported it, and that's why it became such a problem. The analogy with religion, I think, works because it makes it accessible. It makes us understand. And a lot of people have made this argument that the decline of Christianity in the West has left a kind of gap, a vacuum for another religion to emerge. This is why you're not going to get Saudi Arabia turning woke anytime soon, because it's an absolutist theocracy, which is very confident in its own beliefs. And of course, the principles of wokeness are completely antithetical. I mean, in a way, there are some similarities. They're both authoritarian. They both believe that you should censor opposing views, etc. But you try doing for all that the group Queers for Palestine think that they would go down well in Arab states. It's not true. They execute homosexuals. This is not a progressive idea. So wokeness won't, I don't think, ever emerge in an Islamic theocracy, because the belief system is too overwhelming and sincerely held. But maybe, and I'm not really qualified to say this, and it's worth exploring, maybe the decline of Christianity meant that the field was sort of ripe for some new belief system to take hold. And that's exactly what's happened. So, and that isn't me making the case that we need to go back to a Christian theocracy. I don't believe that at all. But what I am saying is it might explain why it's more likely to emerge in countries that don't already have an absolutist authoritarian regime.
How do you think wokeness as a state of mind affects or works with the current political situation? Because the wokeness way of thinking is nicely viewed in Israel-Palestinian conflict, right? I mean, Douglas Murray made great arguments in a lot of interviews about that. Do you think that this kind of that's Israel-Palestinian conflict is a new playground for the wokeness ideas?
Well, I think it's a very, very different thing, but there are points where it overlaps, insofar as in the woke worldview, Islam, for whatever reason, is at the very top of the victim hierarchy, even though
Why?
I know. I don't know. There are 2 billion Muslims in the world. They're very, very powerful. It's one of those really odd things. I think it's because Muslims within Western countries are a minority. And so therefore, in the simplistic woke mindset, they are minorities in need of protection, in need, they're not thinking globally.
Yeah.
So, you even have feminists, support. There've been viral videos of feminists sort of chanting Allahu Akbar and all this sort of stuff. Even though, of course, Islam, like most religions, it sees women as second-class citizens. So, in that sense, you will get from the omnicores, the sort of woke movement that all believe the same thing about the environment, about race, about gender, etc. They will also naturally incline towards supporting Iran, for instance, or supporting Palestine. I mean, we saw how Greta Thunberg easily segued from environmental activism into riding a flotilla into Gaza with, a bunch of snacks, thinking that she could save the people of Palestine. So, I would say it is connected insofar as you will have woke activists who have no understanding of geopolitics, supporting a cause that they simply do not understand. The other thing, of course, is that within wokeness, there is a deeply ingrained anti-Semitism. And that is also the case, of course, with the far right. It's where the far right and the far left have always met. And so therefore, it does lend itself. Anything that Israel does is bad. You even had, after the 7th of October pogrom, people denying the evidence that was put out there by the perpetrators. I mean, the perpetrators filmed it, boasted about it, put it online, but somehow you had Western idiots still saying, oh, it didn't really happen. There weren't any rapes. Oh, it was all the IDF. I mean, seriously, just insane, conspiratorial, completely untethered from reality, this kind of thinking. So yeah, what will happen with wokeness is because they see the world in a very simplistic template of oppressor and oppressed. And in their mindset, Israel equals white man equals oppressor. Therefore, Palestine equals oppressed. Iran equals oppressed. Even though you're talking about the bloody Ayatollah, they will impose that very simplistic, reductive template onto anything. And they have done it in this case as well. Of course, it's a hugely complicated situation, which has absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with these Western trivialities. And yet they will co-opt anything for their cause because they just see the world as this Manichaean good versus evil Disney version of humanity. That's how they see it. So don't expect any nuance from them anytime soon, particularly when it comes to the Middle East.
You use the word simplistic view. Isn't it like inevitable in a sense that our world in a time of social media and stuff is simplistic? I mean, it gets kind of black and white 1-0 thing. Isn't it like that in this current situation, woke mindset will be with us forever?
No, I think the tendency to oversimplify will be with us forever because we are human beings. And those who know much better than I have told me, those who have studied this have told me that it is sort of inbuilt in us to take the simpler route when it comes to critical thinking. In other words, we have these heuristics, these shortcuts in the brain. There's a thing called the cognitive miser model, which means if you have 2 ways of thinking about something, you will instinctively incline towards the easier way. And of course, it is easier. Fascism is easier than liberalism because fascism says, we can just wipe out our enemies and then we win and there's no problem anymore. And liberalism doesn't do that. Liberalism says we live in a plural world. We have to find a way to tolerate people we cannot stand, people we hate. That's a much harder prospect. Any kind of authoritarian thinking is a simplistic way of thinking. Any kind of extreme ideology is a simplistic way of thinking. And it's understandable because it makes sense of a very, very complicated world. It's harder to accept that we do not understand the world. The world is much, much, much more complicated than we can grasp. We have little brains, comparatively speaking, and we, this is not something we're ever going to fully understand. That's a harder prospect, or even indeed to think about. Take any issue, any issue whatsoever that you see these debates raging about online. I mean, how many people have really taken the trouble to sit down and read books from people on both sides of these various debates to weigh up why they think the things they think, to challenge their own assumptions, to read someone else's ideas in good faith and think it through, and to be open to the possibility of changing one's mind. Very, very few people do that. And again, it goes back to education and socialization. The mark of a good education is someone who can think critically. I think very few people can. I think more people used to be able to, if you go back many decades, but fewer now. And that is an indictment on our education system. And I think it's probably to blame for everything. I really do. I think if we could revolutionize education, we would protect ourselves against the possibility of an ideology like wokeness reemerging again, or the mad conspiracy theories I'm seeing from the right at the moment, just thrown out there like absolute crazy, completely deranged theories. This comes about from a desperate desire to understand the world. What is a conspiracy theory? It says, oh, this really complicated, confusing thing that I don't understand. Now I understand. Now I have all the answers. Now I can tell you why the thing happened. I don't need any evidence for it. I can just state it, and that's it. It goes away. Well, with a good education, that could be avoided. That tendency could be avoided, because someone who is well educated will continually be challenging their own assumptions and saying to themselves, what is the evidence that led me to believe the things I believe? And is that evidence robust? We don't have that at the moment. We really don't. I mean, I would propose a complete overhaul of the educational system. You know, I would say we need the top brains in education, the top minds as teachers. We don't have that at the moment because the incentives aren't there. Teachers are overworked, underpaid, really not valued in the way that they should be. They are constantly scrambling to keep up. They have no preparation time. They get blamed for everything. It is not a glamorous job. It is one of the most, if not the most important job in society, but it is thankless. So I would say, let's prioritize education, because I think every other societal ill, it trickles down. You know, I think if we revise education, we will probably sort out so many other problems, including crime rate, the tendency towards authoritarianism, all of these various things. And you would need to do something like, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but you would need to do something like pay teachers 3 times as much as they're currently paid as a starting point. Make them work half the amount of hours that they work at the moment. Now, if you did that, you made it a job that people would compete for, that it would be quite hard to become a teacher because so many people want to be a teacher. If teachers had the time during the day to prepare properly for the lessons, to read carefully the work that is submitted, to feedback, all of those things, which they currently do not have. I was a school teacher and I was always blagging it. I was always basically pretending. I would turn up to a lesson having had no time to mark the essays and return them, or indeed to read the text that I was teaching on some cases. So I would have to pretend. And that's not good. It means that the kids aren't getting a decent education. Well, and that, you know, and I'm not a lazy person. I was working flat out and even I couldn't keep up. So I'm just saying, if we did that, and then you would have time to cultivate this critical thought amongst children. You would have time to challenge people's assumptions. The other thing you can do, by the way, is reduce class sizes. Reduce them to 10. In other words, throw billions and billions and billions of pounds at education first and foremost. That would be my, and of course, I'm not someone who, you know, where do you get that money from? I don't know. But I just think it should be the priority in some way or another. And I think greater minds than mine ought to sit down and work out a way how this could work.
But on the other hand, the education is one of the battlefields of the woke right movements at the moment, especially in the States. So the contra argument would be, I mean, there are the best schools in the world. There are Harvards and Columbias and all of them. With the big money to get in, it's really hard to get in, and etc. Probably the best teachers, I don't know, and they still had the campus fights, and they still fighting now with the political fights. So it probably doesn't work right now, even if there are money.
I think those universities are dominated by mediocrities. And, if you take someone like Claudine Gay at Harvard, very mediocre academic who had plagiarized her thesis by all accounts, why is that person running Harvard? Some of the most vicious and infantile behavior I've seen on social media are from people with doctor in their name. This is actually evidence of the failure of the education that I'm talking about. These are not people who have been well educated. They know how they're maybe innately intelligent people, but they're not critical thinkers. And that's why they've been able to manipulate. That's why they're activists first and foremost. Now, of course, I'm not talking about all academics. There are some very fine academics who do all of the things I'm describing, but they're not the majority, and that's the problem. And also, through this ideology, through this religion, they've been encouraged to keep quiet, which is why they do. They don't do the thing. They're not capable of flourishing in the current system. So I think you have to go earlier than that. That's my point. I think the universities are pretty lost at the moment. It doesn't matter how much money you throw at them, that money will be spent badly because it's run by activists. And at the moment, a lot of schools are run by activists. But if you could completely revise the educational system from the ground up, from earliest stages, from age 4, then you wouldn't have students going to university expecting to be coddled and expecting to be indoctrinated. You would have critical thinkers going and challenging their tutors, saying, no, I want to be surprised, I want to be shocked, I want to be changed, I want to learn. And they would have the humility to do that. We don't have that at the moment. So that's why I say revolutionize education. What I mean by that is from really early.
All right. Now, as somebody who been, I say, chin deep in left wokeness for last 10 years, maybe 15 years, I don't know. How do you see the rise of something which somebody called on a ex Twitter right wokeness, which is basically people with the same mindset but from a far right? How personally do you see it? Because it's I know it from my point of view, it's pretty hard. You basically fighting with somebody on your side, and now when Trump gets to power, you look at him and you basically see he thinks like a complete idiot from the scratch.
Because it makes complete sense to me, because I've never seen wokeness as a matter of left versus right, ever. I know that the majority of those who identify as woke consider themselves left wing. I don't think they are. This is a movement, like I say, that has made an awful lot of money for a very small amount of elite people. That's not really a left wing position. They cultivated this retributive cancel culture, which made it so that the only way you could speak out is if you were a multi-billionaire, if you had fuck you money. So this is a movement that privileges the super rich and demonizes the working class and demonizes the poor. It sides with corporations trying to impose DEI principles on the workers who resent them. So by no serious metric is this a left-wing movement. So for me, left and right doesn't mean anything anymore anyway. Most of the people in the UK who have fought against gender ideology are left-wing feminists. They're old school socialists. So it doesn't mean, and they're now called far right, of course. So none of this means anything now. So I think if people get out of their heads this idea that woke is to do with left, and understand that it's not, the dichotomy is between those who believe in liberty and those who believe in authoritarianism. That's the conflict. And you can have authoritarians on the left, on the right, everywhere in between. And they have always been that way throughout history. So then it makes sense. Then just as seeing wokeness as a religion, as an analogy, makes sense of it, seeing the conflict within wokeness, not as left versus right, but actually seeing woke versus anti-woke is really about authority versus liberty. Once you've locked into that way of thinking, then it all becomes comprehensible.
All right, that makes sense. But then again, a lot of people see Trump rise as the pendulum swing from very far left to very far right, and as we know, when pendulum swings a long way, it hits you pretty hard. Do you think that we are now in the world of extremes, ideologically thinking. Like there is no, because that's the point. A lot of people said that there is no center anymore. There's just like crazies on the left, crazies on the right, and people in the center are basically going from left to right and trying to find some place to hold. Basically,
I totally get what you're saying, and if you think of the comparison between Biden's administration, which pushed for men in women's sports, and transitioning of prisoners, and reparations even, and all this sort of stuff, to go from that to Trump, the complete opposite. And for the election to be, for the country to be so clearly divided down the middle between extremes. I mean, if you want to understand extremes, just go and look on Blue Sky, which is the social media platform set up by all those who ran away from Twitter when Elon Musk took over. And it is an insane echo chamber of what looks like psychopaths. If you go in there with a slightly different point of view, they will tell you to kill yourself. They will attack you, pile on, try and get you banned. It is like every worst aspect of wokeness condensed into one appalling quagmire of a social media site. But that is the mindset that the Democrats seem to have cultivated. But like I say, I still think it's a minority. I mean, if you take the example of men in women's sports, well, Trump signed that executive order with the support of 67% of Democrat voters. So, I mean, the support amongst Republican voters was even higher. But my point is that was an issue that both sides agreed on. Most Democrat voters and Republican voters share the conviction that you shouldn't be sterilizing children because they're gender non-conforming. Very, very few people believe that. So in other words, the key aspects of wokeness are actually shared by people who vote both ways. But the problem is that the elites, as I say, the elites have completely grasped on, clumbed onto these ideas and are running with them. I mean, the Democrats haven't learned a damn thing. They're just going to keep going, and they'll lose as a result of that. I understand what you're saying. I mean, centrism, I don't, I just see myself as a liberal in the old-fashioned traditional meaning of that word, which I know means something very different in America and very different in Australia. But everywhere you go, it means something different. But in the book, I'm very clear about how I define what I mean by liberalism. And people might say that's a centrist position. It's the easy position. But like I say, it isn't. It's the harder position. It's
the hardest at the moment, I would say.
Yeah. And so I don't see it as trying to find a balance between two extremes, but it does involve condemnation of both extremes, of any extremes. Extremes, full stop, I think are bad. Like if you take anything to an extreme, it's going to be absolutely terrible. Whatever ideological background you come from, that's just never a good thing. Eating to extremes is a bad thing. Drinking to extreme, anything. So I would say, we have to, try and restate the case for liberalism. And that's what I'm trying to do in the book, really, which is hard because it's sort of become fashionable to knock it. So I'm sort of having to start from scratch a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there is because that was my next question, bit personal question, because you spend with this, as I said, like last 10, 15 years, and you've been basically surrounded with this problem, which means you've been surrounded with people who are intellectually blinded, to say it a nice way. How did you stay sane? Basically, would be the question. I mean, how did you stay on your way? Because it's really easy to get in a fight on Twitter and say, like, I fuck your mom and you're a cunt and I'm fed up. I mean, I'm fed up with you fuckers. I mean, why you never did that?
I don't know why. A lot of people I know have lost their minds. I think the culture war has driven people really, really insane on both sides of the political spectrum, which is why we're getting more and more really extreme kind of responses online. I don't know why. I mean, maybe I was driven a bit mad by it. I don't know. I mean, every now and then I get a moment where I think, why am I writing books saying that free speech is good? Why am I writing books saying that let's not judge people on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. Why am I stating the fucking obvious in books? Why am I wasting my time? But of course, actually, it's not a waste of time, because those things desperately have to be restated, not just by me, but I mean by everyone. Like, this is, I'd like to think I'm contributing to a return to some kind of sanity. It's not in my nature, I don't think, to I don't know. I think there's something in me that is very innately wedded to the principles of liberalism, you know, and I think, you know, I could have, I mean, the amount of times I've been piled on and defamed and attacked and threatened by people on the far right, far left, trans activists, gender critical feminists, you name it, every faction has gone after me. It would, I think I'm actually a bit surprised I'm not more demented. You know, I think that could have been a very easy thing to happen. And maybe I am a bit, but I don't feel that way. I feel like I've still managed to maintain my balance, but it's, you know, it's difficult when people are continually lying about you and misrepresenting your position and everything. That's, I suppose, another reason why it's important that I write the books, so that, because I've had the number of times I've had people say, I just read your book and I had no idea this is what you thought, because they just believe this sort of straw man version of you that's been put up by various factions. So in that sense, it's a valuable thing to do. But the question as to why, I mean, I now have friends who now believe the most crazy stuff with no evidence at all, and they don't talk to me anymore because, you know, I don't believe that there's a secret cabal of Satanists who run the world and choose the world leaders, you know, and but they know that's true. They know, and anyone who disagrees must be part of the satanic cabal, and
obviously,
you know. So I don't know why I didn't go down that route. I guess it's comforting. I mean, if you know, to have that certainty that you know how the world works, and it, you know, and it also it appeals to the ego, doesn't it? Because you're one of the few that gets it, that really, I mean, that's why all of these people use the same terminology. They talk about being awake. The whole woke movement is about, we are awake, everyone else is asleep. I've also heard the right-wing conspiracy theorists saying, when did you wake up? When did you, you know, it's the whole idea of the red pill. And you know, everyone uses the same metaphor of being uniquely awake, as in we're in the know and other people aren't. And I guess innately, I just never have I've never assumed I know everything. So it might just be as simple as that. Like I'm never prepared to accept that I have all the answers, because that would mean I have to stop learning and I have to stop thinking. And that's a kind of death to me.
Yeah. But then if you look at the politics, instead of crazy, woke, lost Biden, we got a crazy Trump. In Great Britain, probably you can get Nigel Farage as the best man to rule the nation. Isn't it this kind of thing depressing? Like, okay, probably I'm keeping my sanity, but the politics around really goes whoops.
Yeah. I mean, politics has been completely degraded, but maybe sometimes you need a kind of lord of misrule, a kind of figure like Trump, to come in and smash up the system, and to so that it can kind of leave the field free for someone more sensible to come in and restore order. Maybe sometimes that's required. I mean, you know, we desperately needed someone to be in the White House who would stop male rapists being in women's prisons. We just needed someone to come in. And if that takes a Trump, then that's good. And I don't care if well, you know, I wouldn't vote Democrat or Republican if I did have a vote in America, which I don't. Likewise, in the UK, I couldn't vote Tory or Labour. But I recognize the value of someone who I don't necessarily agree with politically on many things, coming in and just restoring some sense. I mean, you're never going to agree with anyone on everything. But what I would love to happen is if we could get back to some kind of political climate where people can stop speaking like they're on Twitter. I mean, we have major politicians, they talk like they're on Twitter. Oh, you don't agree with me? That means you're a Nazi. You know, what are you talking about? You're an elected MP. Why are you behaving like a child? And partly, I guess, it's because politics used to be a really vocational thing. People used to go into it with a humility and an understanding that they were serving the people. Now it's very much a power play. Now it's very much a career. And so you have a lot of careerists in Parliament who are more interested in their own status than they are in actually doing good. And that, I think, is a big reason why we're in the position we're in. And also, the smartest people don't go into politics. That's another thing.
That's obvious.
There are some exceptions to that, by the way. I mean, I know some politicians who are among some of the smartest people I know, but they're not many. You know, there's some.
Will be the world in 10 years better or worse than it's now?
Will the world be?
Yeah.
No idea. I mean, like I say, all civilizations die. I don't know when this one will. I don't know if it will be as soon as that. I hope not. But where will we? I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, I explore some of the possibilities in the book. One of the things I think might happen is you're going to get more authoritarianism from the right, and that's going to grow partly out of a sense of vengeance. You know, the woke have been in power for so long, and they've done so many terrible things. And we should never underestimate and undermine the extent of the damage that the woke movement has caused. I mean, we're talking children have been raped in the grooming gang scandal. That's all because of group identity, this obsession with group identity, the insistence that we mustn't say anything about this predominantly Pakistani grooming gangs because that is racist, right? This week we've had the Casey review into grooming gangs, and she found on one report that someone in authority had Tipp-X'd out the word Pakistani on the file when talking about the perpetrator, erased it out. You know, we had journalists weren't able to write about it. Police weren't able to tackle it. You had children, girls being called whores by the police, saying, well, they're just whores. You know, we don't need to worry about that. I mean, absolutely insane stuff. So, you know, wokeness, obsession with group identity has resulted in child rape, child mutilation and sterilization, sexual assault of women by male prisoners. It's ruined lives, it's ruined careers, it's ruined reputations. It is a very serious problem. And so we shouldn't underestimate that, and we shouldn't be flippant about it, because too often when people talk about wokeness, they think, oh, it's all about vegan sausage rolls and, you know, silly rainbow lanyards and stuff. No, it's about torture, rape, sexual assault, even physical assault, murder, all of these things that have happened as a direct result of wokeness. And I would say that the risk, though, is that you might get another type of authoritarianism that does pretty much the same thing from the other side, start sanctioning torture, starts rounding people up into camps, start doing, you know, this kind of stuff. It's not impossible. I mean, I don't know whether that's going to happen. I know there's a lot of people who would like it to happen. So I hope not.
Now I'm depressed.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I should have been a bit more positive.
No, it's fine. Now, tell me, you moved to the United States from the Great Britain.
Yeah, I'm in Arizona. Yeah.
Why to Arizona?
Because I'm working with Rob Schneider, who lives in Arizona. He's an American actor and comic, and you might know his movies. And we're working together on various projects. And, you know, isn't it amazing to live in the desert after living in the United Kingdom all my life, right? This is quite a move to go to cowboy country and get myself a Stetson. And, you know, I haven't got myself a gun. I'm not going to go that far, but because it is cowboy country, it's a fascinating place. And hopefully we're going to get some of these projects up and running. I've no idea how this is going to go. It's a new project. We're setting up a production company. We will see how it goes. But in the meantime, I'm working on various scripts, creative things, and I'm enjoying being in the baking heat. It is so hot here. You know, in the summer, it gets up to 50 degrees Celsius. It's absolutely, it's intense. But, you know, I've been down to Tombstone to see where the gunfight at the OK Corral happened, which is still there. They've actually got mannequins of Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday and everything to mark where they stood when they were exchanging gunfire. It's all very theatrical. But of course, not that long ago. I mean, that was only 125 years ago, something like that. So it's not really that, you know, but of course, in American history, that's ages ago. But in British history, you know, I've come from, in the UK, I was living in a house that was built in 1545, you know, in the Tudor period. So to me, you know, this isn't history. A building that's 150 years old isn't history, you know. But it's fun. And also, people here are really nice. For some reason, I mean, I'm sure there are some horrible people here. It's human beings, but people just seem so polite everywhere you go.
You are new there. You are new there.
Maybe
You
it's the
will find out.
accent. Maybe it's because they've all got guns, and so they don't want to say anything rude to anyone. I don't know, but you know, whatever it is, it's a nice place to live. Let's put it that way.
Do you still want to do a stand-up comedy in the States?
No, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I did a stand-up gig in the UK just a couple of weeks ago, and it was great fun. I wrote a new set and just tried it, and it was really fun. And I'll probably do some. I'll be doing some stand-up out here, but it will be different, won't it? You know, the references will be different. I can't talk about UK politics. They've no idea who Keir Starmer is over here. Like, there's no chance. So it'll be an interesting challenge if I do it. And it may not translate, or it might go down a storm. Who knows? But that's another possible avenue. But what I am keen to do is go back to creative work. And, you know, I think now I've written a number of books now on the woke movement. I think that's me done on that. I think I've pretty much written all I can about that now. And
that's what I want to... one last personal question, because what I really like about you is that you can write books which are really hard with the ideas, which are really deep, focused, and not funny at all. And on the same time, you can do a comedy writing or write a set and stuff. How your mind is switching? I'm asking personally not for a friend, but for myself, because I personally have a problem with that. Because if I am into something deep, hard, some big idea and stuff like that, I find it hard to go somewhere else and write a joke. It's my brain doesn't work. It needs some time to rewire. I don't know.
Yeah, I understand. Well, no, I mean, it's a different discipline, isn't it? I mean, if I'm writing about the threat of authoritarianism as a civilizational threat, and I'm just cracking jokes every 2 minutes, it probably isn't going to be a great book.
It would be funny.
It would kind of undermine the point. So yeah, but I found a way through Titania McGrath and through my satirical writing and through my stand-up to channel the various frustrations about this really pernicious movement and do something creative with it. And that was what I was trying to do with that. And that's just a different part of my brain, I think. It's the part that makes, part of me wants to critique and analyze. The other part of me just wants to point a finger and laugh. And I think if you put those two together, it can be a bit conflicting. So, I write books which do one, and I write other books that do the other. And that seems to be the way that I work. I prefer it that way. If you're doing stand-up, you don't want to be taking yourself at all too seriously, because it stops being funny. But if you're writing a book about the depredations of wokeness, you have to take yourself seriously. You have to take the argument seriously, don't you? So, it's just a different thing. But I like the fact that I've done both, because it means that, the Titania books and the live tour that we did with her, that it's kind of an outlet. It was kind of like, it makes, I still write a monthly column as Titania for the Critic magazine. And it's a great outlet because I can just mock the stuff. I can just ridicule it. And it's refreshing. And I don't have to go into the details about, I don't have to analyze everything endlessly. I can just do what the kid does in the Emperor's New Clothes story and just point and say, look, you're naked. And isn't that funny? And that's, it's another, I mean, I would say that satire is a really good way of challenging authority and challenging the powerful. And I also think analysis and critique is another effective way of doing it. I just like to do both.
So Titania goes with you to the States or stays in Britain?
Well, I don't know. She's always been international. I think she because her father has houses everywhere, so I don't think she worries about that, and she's probably got a private jet as well.
All right. So last question. Now in Arizona, what are you already missing from the UK?
Nothing. I mean, look, I would say there are some people I very much love in the UK, but you know, I will see them anyway. I will be in touch with them, and also I'll be back periodically in the UK. So you know, that to me isn't so much of a problem. Also, I'm quite a how would I put it? I'm quite a hermit-like person anyway. Like I go for months and years without seeing my closest friends. You know, I can easily do that because you know I work a lot. I'm busy, and they know that about me and they understand it. But I will always be in touch with people. As for the country itself, well, I certainly don't miss London. I don't miss I mean, there's something about being in London. There's always, wherever you go, an edge of menace. There's always a kind of weird threat. There's always a kind of sense of something could kick off here. And you don't get that at all here. I think what's happened in London is we've lost the high trust society. It's gone. You know, if you're in a bar in London and you accidentally knock into someone, your first instinct is, oh, there's going to be a fight. That wouldn't happen here. Or from what I gather, you know, if you knock into someone, everyone's just apologizing and saying, oh, sorry, man, I didn't mean to do that. Are you okay? There's a very significant difference now. And so I don't miss any of that. I mean, so I you know, I'm very fond of a lot of Great Britain, but I'm looking forward to something very, very different. And that is not, by the way, I'm not being utopian or suggesting that there are no problems in the US. There clearly are. Quite big problems, but as in terms of day-to-day life, this just feels much better to me.
All right, you in London, you made a Comedy Unleashed, the comedy club. Does it still work?
Yeah, that's where I was performing 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So it goes. Do you plan to do something like this in States, like
maybe
like second comedy mothership or something like?
Well, we did a Comedy Unleashed show at last year at the Freedom Festival in where was that? LA? No, not LA. What's the place with all the casinos? Las Vegas.
Las Vegas.
So we did that, and it went really well. And so you know, absolutely, I think no reason why that couldn't work over here. Or maybe I'll do something with Rob over here, some sort of comedy live tour thing. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it could easily happen. But in the meantime, Comedy Unleashed is still going in the UK. You know, we do a monthly show in London, but we also have shows in Leeds and Manchester and Edinburgh. So there's lots of other possibilities. That's going to keep going, and I think it's much needed because the UK comedy scene is so stifled, so hopelessly captured by wokeness, and just really banal as a result, and really uninspiring. So in a way, it's quite good to be out here. And maybe you're right. I should just do more gigs.
All right. So Andrew, thank you very much for your time, and enjoy your new United States experience, whatever it is.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Care.
Now,